So today or now, I would like to introduce this idea of a road to revolution. And I want to start just with a very brief conversation about Enlightenment ideas. And I want us to think about how Enlightenment ideas influenced the founding fathers and led to the American Revolution. And throughout this whole topic, of the Road to Revolution, which will be broken down into a few different informational presentations like this, I want us to also be brainstorming and thinking about these ideas. Can you answer these questions? Can you answer the question, to what extent did the French and Indian War maintain continuity and foster change in the relationship between Great Britain and the 13 colonies? I'm going to turn that into a practice SAQ for you as well. And then also make sure that you can explain the intellectual and political causes of the American Revolution. And today, we're going to be talking a lot about that second question. So, the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason. This is a time when the laws of nature are in many ways going to be applied to the societies in which we live. The idea of liberalism is going to come into play here, and it's not this idea of liberal versus conservative that we have in the United States today. It's this, or leftist versus far right, however you want to put it. It's this liberalism is the idea that citizens, that people who live in a place should have a say in the government of that place. That's what liberalism is, and it's an Enlightenment / Age of Reason idea. Rationalism is, of course, very important during this period. Immanuel Kant has the famous quote, "Dare to know, have the courage to use your own reason." Can we think things through? Can we understand? And the rise of deism as a way to understand the world around us, a religious belief where you believe in God, but that you believe in God as they say, the divine clockmaker. Some of you guys have probably heard of deists before, that God made the clock, God wound the clock. He's responsible for all those little mechanisms inside the clock, but that once the clock is running, once the universe was sort of hit play, then the creator is hands off and stepped back, so that humans are the guiding force behind what happens in the world, even though God did create the world. John Locke, we've mentioned before, his importance, his influence on the American Road to Revolution. These are some excerpts from a text of his, a second treatise on government. I'm not going to read every single word to you. A couple of these are going to be on your Hippo charts slides, that your digital notebook that you'll be editing. But if we look at the first one, at least, we will see some familiar ideas. The state of nature has a law of nature to govern it, which obliges everyone, and reason, which is that law, teaches all mankind that, being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. And I always find it interesting that we have pursuit of happiness, but how closely are we linking pursuit of happiness with possessions? Something to think about. He goes on to talk about how important it is that the government have the consent of the governed, and also the idea of security. How should the government be protected from corruption and also feel secure, or the citizens of that government, I should say. Adam Smith, we've also mentioned him before. His text, The Wealth of Nations, is very important, where he articulates ideas like laissez-faire economics, this concept of free trade, that the government shouldn't interfere in the market or in the economy, that instead that there is an invisible hand that guides it. And the three laws that sort of comprise that invisible hand are the idea that more production is born out of self-interest. If it's government should create conditions that make sure that it is in people's best interest to increase production, economic production, that economic competition should be fostered, and that the market should be dictated, so wages, prices should be dictated by supply and demand. And these Enlightenment philosophers and also philosophes are just Enlightenment philosophers in France. We know Voltaire and his text Candide, Baron de Montesquieu and his idea of the spirit of the laws, right? That it is important to understand the spirit of the laws. Jean-Jacques Rousseau and his articulation of the separation of powers, checks and balances. We also want to talk about the social contract. That is articulated by Rousseau and by other thinkers like Thomas Hobbes, and the idea of a general will. Mary Wollstonecraft is also down here on the right, and she is a very important female Enlightenment voice who sort of raises her hand and says, but also women, right? All men are created equal, she says, but also that includes women. It's kind of like when we get to the French Revolution and that declaration of rights and sentiments of women is going to be such an important text. So the Enlightenment thinkers are already sort of looking at what it would be to create a government that was based on these principles. And then the United States will attempt that. The social contract theory is also important, this idea that government says it will do A, and if government does A, then the citizens will do B. But as soon as one of those groups starts doing its part, then we sort of descend into this chaotic existence. All right, so that's just a very brief overview. We'll be back with part 2 of this soon.